don't know me, I'm Jane. Nice to meet you. Thank you, Sam and the worship group. That was really lovely. I always really enjoy coming to Swavesey. There's a real feeling of God in this place and a real family atmosphere, and I always feel incredibly welcome. I know you through my friend Kate, who seems doggedly determined to actually never be here whenever I'm preaching. I mean, her son's running a 10K. So, reading this morning was from Mark 10, verses 46 to 52. I love the story of Bartimaeus. This account in Mark only takes up 7 of the, and this is according to Google, I did not count them, 31,102 verses in the Bible. So you could be excused for overlooking it because it's pretty tiny. On the surface, it's one of the many accounts of Jesus performing the miracle of healing. However, when you look a little bit deeper, it is so much more than just a story about physical healing. It's a story of perseverance, faith, hope, transformation, and discipleship. Bartimaeus began the day as a blind beggar sitting at the roadside. And by the end of the day, he had discarded his old life and was walking with Jesus. His life was changed forever because he refused to give up. So I'm sure all of us here can think of situations in our life that feel completely beyond our control. They're too big to even get our heads around. And that can feel exhausting and discouraging. And we might be bringing these situations before God in prayer, but we just don't seem to be getting the answers. And I'm sure all of us at some time have begun to thought, well, God isn't listening, God's not hearing. But when we do feel like that, because I think we should all admit we do sometimes feel like that, when we do feel like that, the story of Bartimaeus reminds us that answers often come to those who persevere. Bartimaeus teaches us that to persevere is not merely enduring hardship. It is continuing to trust God when everything around us says we should quit. It's the steadfastness to keep moving forward in faith, even when the journey that we're on is really, really difficult. So, what can we learn from Bartimaeus this morning? I'm not going to be a Baptist here. I haven't got a 3-point sermon. I've got a 7-point sermon. So, nobody was anywhere they had to be this afternoon? It's okay, they're quite short points, I promise. Okay, so point 1. Perseverance begins with recognising your need. Bartimaeus faced many challenges. He was blind. He was poor. He depended on the generosity of others. He was overlooked by society. People walked past him every day. And you know what? He knew all these things about himself. He didn't try to put on a brave face or pretend that things were anything other than what they were. He was in a pretty hopeless situation, but he recognised his need, and he recognised that only Jesus could change things. I don't know about you, I'm a bit of an ostrich. If I don't think about something bad, then it will just magically disappear. Giving voice to it somehow makes it more real. But if we don't acknowledge something, how can we genuinely be bringing it to God earnestly in prayer? We can't. God will respond when we admit our weaknesses, Bring them honestly before him and trust in him and not our own abilities. Point 2. Perseverance takes hold of every opportunity. When Bartimaeus heard that Jesus was passing by, he recognised who Jesus was, and he knew this was his opportunity. It was now or never. He cried out, "Jesus, Son of David, have mercy on me." The use of the title Son of David shows us that he recognised Jesus was the promised Messiah. And although Bartimaeus couldn't see Jesus physically, he saw him spiritually. Sometimes people with perfect eyesight, even those of us who proclaim to know him, fail to recognise Christ and the opportunities he presents us with. I'm sure we're all familiar with the story of the man in the flood. A man is stranded in his house during a flood. As the waters rise, he falls to his knees and he prays to God to save him. His neighbour comes by in a rowboat and offers help, and the man says, "No, God will save me." Hours later, a second boat comes along and the man refuses help again. By this time, the waters have risen so high that he's had to climb onto his roof to avoid them. Finally, a helicopter approaches and extends a rope to rescue the man. Yet, he still waits, believing that God will miraculously save him. Sadly, the man drowns. And when he reaches heaven, he says to God, "Why didn't you save me?" And God said, "I sent a rowboat, a motorboat, and a helicopter. What more did you expect?" And while this is a little bit tongue-in-cheek, I'm sure that at times all of us are guilty of not recognising those opportunities that God presents us with. We wait for the perfect situation and the perfect conditions before seeking God. Bartimaeus did not wait. He responded immediately and seized the opportunity that God had provided. Point 3. Perseverance refuses to be silenced. Verse 48 reads, "Many rebuked him and told him to be quiet, but he shouted all the more." This is the heart of the story. The crowd tried to silence him. I like looking at different versions of passages in the Bible. The Message says the people tried to hush him up. The New Living Translation says they said, "Be quiet." And the Good News Bible, my personal favourite, "Many of the people scolded him and told him to be quiet." You can imagine it, can't you? A huge crowd all thinking that the beggar sitting on the floor was too insignificant, unworthy of the attention of Jesus, and none of them too afraid to have voiced this opinion. How many of us become discouraged with even the slightest hint of being told we aren't enough? How often do we falter at the first hurdle? Not Bartimaeus. The louder the opposition became, the louder he cried out. The obstacle in his way became the fuel for greater determination. 4. Perseverance gets Jesus' attention. We hear how Bartimaeus' perseverance paid off. There were hundreds of people surrounding Jesus. There would have been a lot of noise. It would have been like trying to get on the tube at Wembley after a Harry Styles concert. And yet, the voice of one man persistently crying out to him caused Jesus to stop. God hears persistent faith. Don't get me wrong, It doesn't mean that he ignores others. It simply highlights that sincere, determined faith is precious to God. 5. Perseverance requires leaving behind the old life. Throwing his cloak aside, he jumped to his feet. Until I started preparing for this service, I didn't actually realise quite how significant that one sentence was. For a first century beggar, such as Bartimaeus, their cloak was likely their most valued possession. It provided warmth at night, and when they spread it on the ground, it served as a physical mat for the collecting of coins. So basically, the receptacle for the source of income. But before Bartimaeus received healing, he threw that aside. This meant that he was abandoning his only possession, which acted as his security, his warmth, and his livelihood. He was discarding his old life as a beggar and was taking a decisive step towards Jesus and a new life. Sometimes, it's a tricky one, God asks us to let go before we can receive. We can't cling to the old life while stepping into God's new purpose. Point 6. Perseverance leads to personal encounter. Jesus stopped and spoke to Bartimaeus, and he asked of him, "What do you want me to do for you?" Jesus knew Bartimaeus was blind. Of course he did. He's Jesus. And yet he invited Bartimaeus to express his faith by directly asking for what he desired. And Bartimaeus simply answered, "Rabbi, I want to see." Faith is specific. Probably all a little guilty of praying one of those prayers. Do you know the ones I mean? There you go. Dear God, if it is your will, I ask that you intervene in this situation to bring about the end that you desire and that brings glory to your name. We're not actually asking for anything. It's just a lot of words that mean we can say that our prayers have been answered with whatever the outcome is. Instead of praying vague prayers, we need to be specific, to ask boldly and clearly in a personal relationship. You know, I have a personal relationship with my husband. When I want him to do something, I don't say, "If it's your will, John, and if you could find it within yourself to do something that would help me in the unloading of the dishwasher," I just say, "John, can you unload the dishwasher?" It's much easier to have a personal relationship when you're actually honest and communicate with each other. 7. Perseverance ends in transformation. Jesus heard Bartimaeus and he responded, telling him that his faith had healed him. Immediately Bartimaeus received his sight. His prayer had been answered. He had received what he had asked for. It's funny, whenever you mention this passage, so whenever I spoke to anybody and said, "Oh, I'm preaching on Bartimaeus," and even Sam did it this morning, they call him, "Ah, yes, blind Bartimaeus." No, he's not blind anymore. I think we should be calling him Bartimaeus, who once was blind but isn't anymore. But that's just my little thing. Anyways, on having those prayers answered, he didn't just say, right, thanks very much, pick up his cloak and head home to continue with his life as before. Having had his prayers answered and his eyesight restored resulted in a transformation in Bartimaeus, and not just a physical transformation. It wasn't just that he got his eyesight back. The final line in this passage is, he followed Jesus along the road. His miracle became the beginning of his discipleship. Because real faith doesn't stop with answered prayer. It leads to a life of following Christ. So my husband, taking his name in vain again, always says, that's your 7 points, so we're nearly done. He always says a sermon has to have a so what. He says, it's all well and good, someone standing up there and telling me all this, but what does that actually mean to me? How can I apply that in my life when I walk out the doors after the service today? So my so what for you today is this. Perseverance is more than stubborn determination. It is a life lived with confident faith. Faith that refuses to take our eyes off of Jesus and refuses to stop calling on his name. So that when others say to us, be quiet, we say, no, I'll cry louder. When circumstances tell us it's impossible, we know that nothing is impossible in Jesus. When fear tells us to stay where you are, our faith causes us to say, no, I'm getting up and I am moving forward. When Jesus calls, faith leaves the old cloak behind. And when Jesus answered, our lives are transformed, not just by receiving his blessing, but by following him. Take encouragement from Bartimaeus. Don't let discouragement or the opinions of others silence your faith. Continue seeking Christ with persistence, trusting that he hears, he cares, and he calls people to himself in his perfect time. Just pray. Heavenly Father,